Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Very warm welcome to you all. Thanks for joining us today, which is our fourth session in this series of webinars. So for those of you who don't know us, we are Irish in Britain, and we're a membership organisation supporting a network of Irish organisations throughout Britain and supporting the wider Irish community in Britain. So my name's Aisling. I will be hosting today's webinar. Before I hand over to my colleague and to the speakers, I'll just run through some housekeeping for our session today. So this session is being recorded, but only our speaker and panelists will appear on screen and microphone. So the recording is for the purposes of a learning resource, which will be uploaded and accessible on our website as part of our dementia training and information. So you should have all received our privacy policy in your invitations, but I will post a link to it in the chat box, which is just at the bottom of the screen when this session begins. Okay, so as attendees, you're not visible and your microphones are on mute. If you look to the bottom of the screen, you'll see both a chat box and a Q&A box, which I will be monitoring throughout the session. So any questions, queries, comments, please post them in there. And towards the end of the session, we're going to hold a space for Q&A, but I will be monitoring both of those boxes throughout, and we welcome all feedback to either of those facilities. Okay, so just to say, if anyone attending today doesn't wish to be emailed further about any of these sessions, if you could just drop me a message either in the chat box or you can email me after this session. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is hand over to Zibby. Zibby is our Quivener Development Coordinator, and Zibby will just speak briefly about the project and she'll introduce our speakers for today. All right, so over to you, Zibby.
Thank you, Aisling, and welcome to everybody joining us today. This is a webinar as part of a series of webinars for our Quivener programme. Quivener is an Irish word which means memory, and we're delighted to have the support of the Race Equality Foundation in creating some resources, particularly aimed at people from Irish and other minority ethnic groups who are family carers or volunteers supporting people who may be living with dementia. And it's a particularly timely project given the current situation with the COVID pandemic. Today, our fourth session, we're delighted to welcome Emily Oliver, who is a mental health nurse who currently works as a consultant Admiral Nurse for Dementia UK. Together with her colleague Joan, who is also an Admiral Nurse and works on the Admiral Nurse Helpline. They will tell you a bit more about Dementia UK and what they do as Admiral Nurses. And today we're very pleased that they'll be talking about a really important topic for family carers and volunteers, which is on preventing agitation, dealing with anger and difficult behaviour. So I'd like to hand over now to Emily and Joan, who will talk to you about the topic today. And then at the end, we'll be taking questions. Please do type any questions you may have into the chat and we'll put those to you, to the panelists. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, I thought I would just come on video first to say hello. I don't know if Joan, you're able to put your video on as well, and then we'll start sharing the screen with our presentation. There she is, there's Joan. So you can see a face to the voice behind. I'll turn my video off now and then I'll share my screen. So I'm hoping that you can see that there. So as Zibby said, we're here today to talk about managing distress and meaningful activity in dementia care. And we've already been nicely introduced, so I won't go into that any further. So Joan and I both work for Dementia UK, and Dementia UK is a national charity that works across the UK that offers specialist dementia support to families affected by dementia. So Admiral Nurses are specialist dementia nurses who work alongside families to provide one-to-one support, expert guidance and provide practical solutions. The charity was founded in the 1980s by the Levy family, who experienced a lot of hardship when caring for their dad, Joseph levee, and his name was Admiral Joe because of his love of sailing. So that's where the name Admiral Nurses came from. The family felt that nobody should have to go through what they went through, so founded the charity based on their experience. So Admiral Nurses work across a whole range of settings. Initially, they only worked in the community, but we've actually branched out to loads of other settings now. So they work in hospitals, care homes, hospices, GP practices, and we also have Admiral Nurses working in the charity sector, for example, Age UK. So Admiral Nurses also run a national dementia helpline, which is where Joan works, offering support to people both by phone and by email. And Admiral Nurses also deliver Admiral Nurse clinics. Now, these are locality based, and they might be run in pharmacies, they might be run at conferences, they might be run within the workplace. So we get approached by organisations to go and deliver Admiral Nursing clinics where people can have a one-off session with one of our nurses. So Admiral Nurses support people from before diagnosis all the way through to end of life, and actually sort of post bereavement. So after the person with dementia has died, they continue to provide support to carers beyond that where needed. Now, I know there is a session as part of this host of webinars that is on dementia, but I just thought I'd give you a slight overview for those of you who haven't watched that. So we know that dementia is increasing in the UK and actually globally. So we believe that there's about 850,000 people living with the condition in the UK, and that is set to rise to approximately 2 million by 2050. As a result of the increase of people living with dementia, we know that there's about 700,000 unpaid carers, and that could be neighbours, spouses, children. We know that dementia is an umbrella term for a number of diseases. So you might hear people talk about Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, and sometimes they are used interchangeably with the term dementia. But if you imagine dementia as an umbrella, and underneath that is all the different types of dementia. And there are actually over 400 different types of dementia that cause a range of symptoms. We know that nobody's experience of dementia is the same. So although some of the symptoms might be the same, for example, memory loss, actually people's experience of the disease is different. So the progression might be different, the way they present might be different, their behaviour might be different, the type of medication they need might be different. We also know that people with dementia are likely to have more illnesses and diseases. So the estimated is about 3 or more comorbidities. So actually we have to take that into consideration as well when we're supporting people with dementia. I'm going to hand over to Joan now to talk about some of the symptoms and signs.
Hi, and thank you for having us today. Just looking at the signs, the first thing that comes to mind is often memory loss, but that might not be the first sign of dementia for many people. So just looking at this chart, it outlines some of the things that you could be picking up. For example, when a person with dementia suddenly starts to make mistakes or withdraws from activities and things that they really enjoy, maybe just stop doing them, or they make excuses. They might even get lost in familiar places. Out driving, might take the wrong roads or stick for different routes. And some people, the first sign of dementia can actually be difficulty in communicating, not finding the right word, or struggling with language. That may actually be the first sign. Poor concentration and change in visuospatial perception. What we mean by this is where a person isn't quite sure where they are in their space, as it were. So they might bump into things, or they might have difficulty parking the car, not quite sure, or they're not able to concentrate on a task. So that it might be something as small as that. Or it could be their mood, changes in their mood or their personality, or maybe some characteristics that become more exaggerated. Someone who, for example, would be very anxious becomes more so, and that might be a sign of a dementia. Right, so this particular talk, we're thinking very much about a person with dementia who is in distress or showing signs of stress. And looking at this slide here, we're thinking about the person who's perhaps moving, they're pacing around, a little bit agitated, or they're maybe very resistive, they don't want you to help them, they appear to be frustrated, the language changes, perhaps using swear words, language that they wouldn't normally use. Might even be that they're quite rapid in their speech, or they're angry in their tone, and just generally not their usual placid self. Sometimes when we think of distress, we don't realize that it could be just something as simple as a change in posture, the way somebody holds themselves or sits, or even picking up on their facial expression, their eyes. Do they look suspicious? Are they suspicious of you? Are they not sort of recognizing? And for others, it can be that they get tearful, they get angry, and you don't quite know how you're not able to sort of calm them down. Another thing that often we see people, they're clingy, they're following their family care, the main person that cares for them around. They don't want to be on their own. And even a person with dementia who is withdrawn, sleeping a lot, just taking no interest, reluctant to eat or drink, that again could be a sign of distress. So the next slide, we're looking at the possible causes, because with behaviour, it is a way of communicating with where a person with dementia doesn't actually have the language or the words to speak. It is the behaviour, it becomes a form of communication. So it could be that increased anxiety, changes in their sort of routine might be throwing them a little bit, or it might be that they're feeling hungry, bored, might be in pain, they might be constipated. It may be a sign of something physical that's going on. And urinary tract infections, sometimes called UTIs or chest infection, often can be picked up through behaviour. Or you've probably heard delirium, that can develop into delirium if it's not treated. The other thing, the environment where a person is, how they spend their day. The room could be too bright, it could be too dark, the evenings are drawing in, that can throw a person with dementia. It could be too hot, too cold, too quiet, too noisy. So each situation, as Emily said, is very, each person's journey with dementia is very individual. So it is about understanding that person as an individual and what they like. Oh, I don't know what's happened. Have I missed this? Ah, here we go. Right. So thinking about how to manage behaviours, and Emily will probably go into this in more detail. We start thinking about the routine. Routines, they give reassurance to a person with dementia if they have a routine. And doing things at the same time, a regular pattern to the day, and even thinking about from day to day during the week, having particular days to do things, that can create a sense of purpose and a sense of safety for a person. Trying to keep that environment relaxed and calm, and that's as much about how the main family carer or carers are with the person, that they create that calmness. If they're calm in themselves, how they be around the person with dementia, that creates the environment. The communication skills, it's important to remember that a person with dementia's communication changes as the disease progresses. So going into huge, long explanations, perhaps trying to give too much information is not very helpful for a person with dementia. So keeping conversation, taking your cues from the person with dementia, and keeping it more succinct as and when they need information, and checking that their environment is comfortable, so that they are having enough to eat and drink, and having drinks when they need it, because they may not know when to ask for a drink, and making sure they're warm enough or cool enough, because they may not be able to regulate their body temperature. Also very important. And thinking about, well, music. I don't want to go into that too much detail, because I think Emily's going to want to explain that further. We talk a lot about orientation in dementia care, and at times people with dementia do become disorientated, or they sort of lose a sense of where they are, what day of the week it is, or what time it is. So even by sort of maintaining those routines, that is a way of keeping a person orientated to the day. But sometimes that is not always the best approach to take. That as the day goes on, when I think about people who we talk about sundowning, where they become more confused towards the end of the day, not necessarily recognizing their own home or the person who's caring for them, that they may talk about things that are not quite true, or and it's best in those circumstances perhaps to go with where they're thinking in their brain, to validate what they're saying, rather than trying to put them right, trying to correct them. Because by correcting a person, if they're quite agitated and distressed, it will only make them more agitated. So trying to sort of then perhaps even distract them, make a cup of tea, or put on some music, changes sort of the atmosphere around them, that can be a good way to sort of take their mind off. You often think about the old vinyl records, where the needle would get stuck in one part, when that's almost what's happening to the person's brain. So you're trying to help them to jog on to the next track, as it were, by creating a distraction. But Emily's going to take over now and go into more detail on ways of dealing with this. Over to you.
Thank you, Joan. So I'm going to talk about meaningful activity. And we often hear this term when thinking about dementia care, and often when we're talking about distraction, we often hear, oh, we should do some meaningful activity. We need to make activities meaningful. And we often get the question of, what does that actually mean? And it's an interesting one, because there isn't really a definition other than sort of what it says in the title, which is any activity that is meaningful to the person with dementia. So that might be a physical activity, it might be a leisure activity, it might be a social activity. And actually, if we reflect on ourselves, these are activities that we participate in most days, or at least, weekly. It's more important for people with dementia to participate in these activities, because we know that when people do get a diagnosis, they can become more withdrawn. So people become socially isolated, and in turn that creates their mood to get worse or to lessen. So it's really important that by participating in the meaningful activities, we help people with dementia to lead a better and more enjoyable quality of life. So I started to talk about some of the benefits to meaningful activity, but I'm just going to talk a bit more about this on this slide here. So as you can see, I've put the benefits in this on this smart art. So it allows a sense of purpose and a routine. So as Joan said, actually enabling somebody to maintain a routine can help them to manage distress. So people who potentially used to go to work every day, they had that sense of routine, they got up at a certain time, it gave them a sense of purpose going to work. That doesn't leave us even when we get a diagnosis of dementia. That need for routine and purpose remains. It's important to acknowledge life experience of the person with dementia. So if they had hobbies in the past, it's important to acknowledge what they were and try and sort of provide activity that relates to that activity, relates to that hobby. If they, for example, used to work nights, it might be that actually that activity happens at night rather than in the day. Somebody that works nights their whole life, and Joan and I will probably experience this being nurses, actually working night shifts, we might then struggle to try and do those activities in the day when actually that would be usually when we were asleep. It provides the opportunities for people with dementia to make decisions and have choice. So we know that when people develop a diagnosis of dementia, they might, or they tend to lose their capacity over time, and actually by choosing or having the option of what meaningful activity they can join into, it enables them to make decisions, have that autonomy that actually in other areas of their life that might have been taken away. Meaningful activities actually allow people with dementia to maintain skills and independence, and it's by no fault of anybody else, but actually when people are diagnosed with dementia, we often see that people want to do things for them to alleviate that burden of them doing tasks, to provide that support. But actually in doing so, we sometimes de-skill or take away people's independence by doing that. It's an opportunity for more increased social interaction and social time. That might be with family, with friends, which is really important. As I said, people do become socially isolated at times when they develop a diagnosis of dementia. And overall, it just provides an emotionally nurturing experience for those of us who have meaningful activities that we participate in during the week. You know, we understand that once we've had those, we're happier, we're in a better mood, and that's the same for people with dementia as well. So like I said, meaningful activity should be linked to people's hobbies or interests that they enjoyed before. I hear a lot of people ask me if people are diagnosed with dementia and they're further along in their progression, can they still participate in meaningful activity? And we often say absolutely they can. Obviously it might be different to what they could do a couple of years ago, but actually meaningful activity can happen throughout the person's progression. And as I said, the person with dementia should be encouraged to take an active role in choosing what they want to do. So we're allowing them the choice of activities. So I thought I would just give some examples of what meaningful activities look like to help you to think about what you might provide for the person with dementia. One of the things I often like to say to people is that people with dementia can still participate in the chores. So like I was saying before, people who are caring for people with dementia often start to take on that responsibility of doing everything for them, making cups of tea, doing the dusting, but actually people with dementia can still participate in these chores. And it might be that actually they don't do them to the scratch that you would like them, but it's still really important for them to still do that. I can think of an example when I worked in a hospital, and one of the person with dementia who was admitted actually used to be a nurse. So she was going around to all the beds and trying to help the other patients. So what we did was we just asked her to fold some laundry for us. And actually she was very happy. She was very willing to help us do that. And it provided her a sense of purpose. It provided a sense of distraction. It stopped her from being bored, which she was in the bed. So I always like to tell people that actually people with dementia, if they're able to, can still and should help with the chores. Gardening is a really nice and meaningful activity that people can participate in, and it might be even if people can't get outside, actually you can bring gardening things to them. Gardening allows for a range of senses to be used, so you're touching, you're smelling, you're seeing the different colours, so it's a really nice meaningful activity that works on all the senses of people with dementia. Exercise is still really important. We know that when people are elderly and less mobile, actually their muscles sort of tend to waste and their mobility reduces. So encouraging people to maintain staying active and participating in exercise is really important. And it might be that the people that you're caring for can't participate in a football match, for example, but actually there are other types of exercise that can be done when people are in a chair, in a bed, and we have a range of these on our website, on the Dementia UK website, so you can have a look at those. Life story work is really important. So we often talk about sort of reminiscence and seeing how people were sort of before their diagnosis and learning more about their life before that. And that's something that we can do throughout the diagnosis, the progression of the disease. So working with people to understand what they used to do for a job, showing photographs, reliving experiences that they used to do when they were younger is all really important. And again, we've got a template on our website for a life story workbook, so please do have a look on there and maybe work through that with the person that you're caring for. Dole therapy is something that is a meaningful activity for some people. So again, you know, we have to be aware that what works for one person might not work for another person, but dole therapy has proven to work with some people, and it provides a sense of purpose. It's a comfort. So for somebody to have a doll that they look after, that they carry, and actually it can be very beneficial. I always think music is one of the most meaningful activities, one of the most powerful activities. So I don't know if, you know, you hear a song that you haven't heard in years, but actually you know every single word, and you just think, where was that stored? And that hasn't changed for people with dementia. So music is a really important activity for people to participate in. Reminiscence, similar to life story work, so it might be revisiting old seaside towns that people used to go to. It might be showing photos of old places that people used to go to, providing sweets, you know, that people used to eat. So reminiscence isn't just photo albums, but actually there's a range of senses that we can open up when we think about reminiscence. So it might be, you know, smells and listening, so things that we used to hear when we were younger. So reminiscences can be really powerful. Similar to dole therapy, there's also animal therapy as well. So we're a nation of animal lovers, and that doesn't change when people get a diagnosis of dementia. I don't know if you've seen in hospitals, in care homes, they often have animals come to visit, and that's because that comfort of having that animal close to you is relaxing. It is meaningful for people. Aromatherapy, so I was talking about how important sense of smell is, or hearing, but smell is one of our last senses that we lose. So being able to smell, like I said, things that we used to smell in the past, or a nice cake, we can sort of try and induce other behaviours through aromatherapy. So lavender is quite calming. So there's a range of oils that you can get that can help to manage distress through meaningful activity. Social contact is so important. I know it's very difficult at the moment with the times that we're living in, but even if we can provide support sort of virtually, social contact, so whether that's videos, whether that's being on the phone, actually maintaining social contact is really important for all of us, but also more so for people with dementia. Voice, so if a person with dementia is far along in their progression and actually they're not really able to engage in social contact, still being able to hear, so we can still hear a lot of things, even people who you know, are very advanced. That sense doesn't really go. So listening to people talking, hearing as people read books or stories to them can be a really meaningful activity. So this is very similar to touch. So giving people a hand massage, brushing people's hair, you know, just stroking sort of their shoulders. That's another sense that doesn't tend to go really at all. So providing people with touch and comfort can also be really meaningful, and that's really beneficial for people who are more advanced in their diagnosis. I spoke about gardening, but just spending time outside, nature is a real meaningful activity. There's so many sounds, smells, experiences. So, you know, if you can, spending time outside, if people are sort of can't get out of bed or spend a lot of time in a chair, even having them by a window so they can see outside, nature is very, very powerful. Self-care, similar to what I said about touch, so painting people's nails, giving people massages, brushing their hair, these are all activities that can be meaningful to people. And there's cognitive stimulation as well, so trying to keep people's mind active. So whether that's, you know, if they can do a puzzle or sort of Sudoku at the beginning of their disease progression, but actually at the end maybe it's sort of still watching television, still reading, looking at photos. So all these things help stimulate our mind and can be very helpful. Joan, I'm going to hand over to you. Oh, Joan, sorry, I think you're on mute. We're doing the catchphrase of the
I'll start again. I'm really privileged to work on the Admiral Nursing Helpline, and We've tried to give you an overview today. Dementia is very individual to each family and each situation. What we can offer on the helpline is information, advice, and just even a voice to talk to someone who understands. So please feel that you can ring us in, and we can sort of talk through your situation in more detail, offering sort of tips and hints on how to manage situations. The calls are confidential, and sometimes, unfortunately, we are rather busy, so you might have to leave your name and number, but we always try to get back within the shift. And we try to fit in around your day if we can. The helpline number is up here, and I believe you'll be getting all this information at the end and online anyhow. So please feel that you can ring in and speak confidentially with an Admiral nurse. And this is the Dementia UK website. We have various information, not just on coronavirus, but we've got all the booklets that Emily was suggesting, with lots of easy to read tips and information, advice on all the things we've touched on today. There's also some videos and videos around how you can bring bring younger people, younger members of the family into the circle, looking after the person. So definitely worth to look at. And finally, just to say thank you very much for to everybody who supports us at Dementia UK and the Admiral Nursing Helpline, because without our supporters, we wouldn't be able to provide the support to families. So it's just a big thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to come be with you today. So that leads us on to questions.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you, Emily. Thank you very much. Just have a couple of questions here, and then Zibby also has a couple of questions. So just with regards to someone, how would you suspect somebody was becoming agitated, and what sort of early measures could you take to minimise that?
Well, sorry, will I take this one?
Yeah.
So it's changes in behaviour. So if somebody's a little bit more restless, irritable, they're maybe not eating, not drinking, not their usual self, and sometimes it's very small. It's very small changes that you might notice. Yeah. And I always, usually when I have those conversations, I would always say, check the physical health in the first instance, because there might be something underlying that maybe a urinary tract infection or something. So you might even have a little bit of incontinence, or yeah, going off their food, not eating. Something else I've forgotten. It's just about knowing the person. If you know what's normal for the person you're caring for, then when you spot things that are unusual, that's when you start to think, well, what might this be? And might be something underlying.
I think it can often be quite subtle as well, can't it, Joan? So it could just be a sigh. Actually, if somebody just takes a deep sigh, just like we would, you think, okay, actually maybe something's not right here. Or it could just be sort of the small clench of a fist, or a slight retract in a chair, and just those subtle signs it could be an indication that something is sort of brewing. There might be some distress happening there, so that's sort of the best time to intervene.
Lovely, thanks, Joan and Emily. Just have a question here about night medication. So if somebody is reluctant to use the nighttime medication prescribed for their partner by the doctor, just given side effects and stuff like that, but they're getting no sleep, should they give the medication? What would your advice be surrounding that?
Oh gosh, my personal view is always to try all the other things first, that medication should only be the last resort. So looking maybe at the daytime routine to see how a person is spending their day, and thinking about the night, the getting ready for bed routine, as it were. So it might be that you sort of reduce drinks, so there's less need to go to the toilet up and down during the night. Making sure that somebody's had a busy, active day, if you can do it. Depends, of course, where they're at in their dementia. So they'll go to bed more tired. Thinking about the atmosphere and the sort of environment in the bedroom. Is it warm enough? Is it cool enough? Is it the lighting's subtle, maybe playing music or something before bedtime, and even thinking back, I often think it's not a good thing to watch television, particularly the news late at night. That can sort of disturb a person with dementia. So it's sort of creating the right sort of atmosphere for going to bed in the first place. So that would be my starting point, as it were. Trying to think, is there anything else, Emily, that I've forgotten?
No, I think you're right. I think trying all other measures first. I think actually it might be that it's that person with dementia still isn't sleeping, and actually medication is what we need to try. And you know, there are side effects, but working closely with the GP. So if you do see these side effects, and go back to them, and they can alter either the dose or the type of medication. So if you do notice things, it isn't just sort of a one-stop shop with the medication that you're given. Work closely with the GP, and they'll be able to alter it if what Joan says, you know, hasn't quite worked, and you do feel like medication is the right thing to use.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joan and Emily. Could you talk a bit about what people might be able to do to de-escalate agitated behaviour? What could you do as a carer or as a friend?
Yeah, Joan, should I start first?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, we can chip in. We're tag teaming. So I think the most important thing is for you to remain calm. Actually, if you sort of keep your voice calm, keep your tone low, you know, keep an open sort of expression, then these things help to alleviate the person becoming more distressed. I think it's important to, as Joan said, try and work out where that distress is coming from. Is it a physical need? Is it an emotional need? So actually people sometimes become distressed when, and they might be saying they want to go home when actually they are home. And maybe we need to think about what the emotion is underneath that question. So is it that they don't feel safe, and home is a safe place? So actually, what can we do to help them feel safe? And it goes back to that sort of validating how that person is feeling. Another scenario that people often ask about is when people are saying that they want their mum, you know, older people whose parents have probably, you know, passed away. And again, it's like, okay, what is it behind that question? Because probably they're not actually looking for their mum, they're looking for a sense of safety, a sense of security. And it might be that we'll use distraction techniques in that. So rather than saying, okay, your mum isn't here, your mum's passed away, and rather than lying and saying, oh, your mum will be here later, we're saying, tell me about your mum. What did your mum used to do? Well, where did your mum live? So it's actually just about entering that person's space. Joan, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything you've said, and sometimes it's about popping out, put the kettle on, making a cup of tea or bedtime drink, or maybe even moving into a different room in the house. And sometimes there are things that people recognise. It might be an object, something that would just bring them back to that moment, and they remember where they are. And it can be something very simple, a tone of voice, a turn of phrase, the way someone talks, a term of endearment, or how the carer speaks to the person with dementia. So it might be sort of entering into that language that they would understand. Yeah.
And I know we often talk about sort of a toolkit, having that toolkit, that rucksack of things that you're going to use. And it might be that one day one thing works and the next day it doesn't work. So just having a sort of a list of ideas in your head of things that you're going to try, and if they don't work the first time, you know, try them again another time. Actually, one thing that works one day won't work the next day, and vice versa.
Thank you. We've had a question from a family carer who is asking what you think about locking doors, where somebody might have a tendency to go out, and would locking a door with the idea of keeping that person safely inside, would it potentially escalate agitation, do you think? Or what do you think about that?
Joan, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, right. I do worry about locking doors, and you've got it's all about the risk assessment, really. I think when you lock a door, you create you actually add to the person's agitation, because they become frustrated. They need to get through the door, and you're thinking, well, why do they need to, a sense they need to get out, they need to stretch their legs, they need to smell fresh air. And sometimes if you would take, I would sort of advise to take the person out, even if it's only stepping out into the fresh air, that may just be enough, and they'll want to come back indoors again. Or think about maybe taking the person to another room or out into the garden. So it's maybe that sense that they just need to be somewhere else and need to get out. So it's trying to understand what's behind it. And sometimes you can use diversion, yeah, like the cup of tea or putting music on. But other times it is just better to actually go with the person, to take them, if that's possible to do that, to take them out for a short walk or a drive. I've known people go out for a drive at a certain time in the evening, and then they come back and they feel they feel more settled and calm in themselves. Yeah,
I think it might be that maybe if you as the carer need to go out, there are sort of respite services, and they are opening up again. I know it's been difficult during COVID, but actually they are opening up again. Sitting services, as they're called, so everyone's entitled to a certain amount per week. It might be worth looking into that. There's also a lot of technology out there now that can be very beneficial for, there's often sensors that if you walk past, it will relay a message. So it might just say, or where are you going? And you can even record your own voice. So actually that person with dementia hears you saying that. So that's an alternative to not opening the door. Another thing, and again, it is quite controversial, is sort of GPS trackers. And I know the University of Southampton have just done a research study about the benefits of sort of GPS tracking. So it might be worth looking into something like that as well.
Thanks, Emily and Joan. We have a question here from somebody who was a family carer, who said that they've used your helpline a number of times and it's amazing, but was wondering if you have any video chat facility, video calls.
Not yet, not to my knowledge.
So I think we are doing a lot of work about sort of clinics. So it might be that actually clinics might be running up in your area, and that's when you get the opportunity to meet somebody face to face. I know we're also looking at sort of dementia at work, which might be providing sort of clinics virtually, like you're saying. So not at the moment, but potentially in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. And we just have a question here as to, what would you do if somebody was to become violent and agitated?
Right. Well, I would say that the carer's safety is paramount. And if you've tried some of the things we've suggested and it's just not working, it is about contacting the emergency services to get help. Maybe going next door to a neighbour. If you've left a person for, to leave a person maybe for 5-10 minutes and gone back might be another thing to do. But in some circumstances, you do have to call the police if your safety is compromised.
I think you're right. I think one of the things that I often say to carers is try and ensure that you have an exit route. So when you're entering a room, ensure that you are the closest person to the door, so that if things do escalate, if things do become violent and there is aggression, that you can remove yourself from that space and enter a safe space. So if you are able to, just ensure that you're the closest to the door, that the person with dementia wouldn't block that exit path. And yeah, like Joan said, sort of exiting, finding a neighbour, removing yourself from that situation.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've had a question from somebody who wants to have some advice about how to best support their parents. So they have one parent who is a family carer for the other parent who is living with dementia. and they don't live with them, and they're worried that the parent who's caring for the person living with dementia is perhaps experiencing some kind of aggressive behaviour from that person, but it's the mum, but the mum doesn't want to say or disclose, or won't say anything about it, and is very protective and doesn't wish to talk about anything like that. And they're wondering how could they best support their mum in that situation. So basically they suspect that perhaps the mum is experiencing aggressive behaviour from the dad, but isn't able to open up about it.
I think it's so difficult, isn't it, when you are a child and you're seeing your mum living through that sort of difficulty. It might be that your mum doesn't feel they're able to express those challenges, those concerns to you, and it might be that they might benefit from talking about that with somebody else. So if you could just provide, like we said, the Admiral Nursing Helpline, they might feel more comfortable talking about this with somebody else. I wonder if you've expressed your concerns to your mum. I think sometimes conversation and communication about that is one of the hardest things, but actually once it's out there in the open, it's often the best way that it's resolved. Joan, have you got any?
Yeah, I would go along with all of that, and also be maybe to contact their GP as well if you've got concerns, or encourage your mum to go to see her GP. Most GPs now have a register of carers, so they're aware of people who are family carers. At the helpline, we do understand when people have to suddenly hang up or calls because a person with dementia has come into the room and it gets a bit awkward. We do prioritise when calls come in, and if they've left a message and the family carer sounds distressed, so we would always prioritise those calls when the helpline is busy. I mean, it's just about getting her to talk to someone, starting that dialogue really. And I think we find on the helpline that people do tell us things that they say they don't want to bother, don't want to disturb their family, they don't want to worry their family. So they do find the benefit of talking to somebody who's outside of the family circle.
Yeah. And it might be, rather than addressing it sort of directly, saying to mum, you know, actually I think dad or is being aggressive towards you, it might be just bring it up in conversation. Oh, I attended a webinar today about managing distress in dementia. You know, have you thought about that? Have you thought about what you would do if that did happen? So rather than accusations, actually it's a general conversation, but at the same time mum's picking up, okay, I would need to do this, these are hints and tips that I can use. So perhaps it's not addressing it directly, but just approaching the subject.
Thank you. We've also had a question about verbal abuse. So somebody who's looking after their relative whose behaviour has changed since they have had dementia. So somebody who was always very polite in the past, who's now much freer with their language, using swear words, but also sometimes verbally abusing people. So the question is partly how to manage that situation, but also the person is concerned that sometimes the person they care for is rude about other people, sometimes in making racist comments, and they're wondering how can they help to manage that situation.
No, it's not uncommon at all, and I think I don't know what type of dementia the person has, but often when people have sort of frontal temporal dementia, which is the part that affects our personality, people's personality and behaviours often change, and actually people do they swear more, and it makes it difficult for people who are supporting them because they become anxious about going outside, and then that's where we see things like social isolation. And so maybe it's just about taking that person out with friends who you feel comfortable with, and who are aware of the diagnosis and who are accepting of that. I think often it's often worse for the carer than it is for the person with dementia, because they're aware of how other people are reacting. But taking them out with a circle of friends who know about their diagnosis and who wouldn't take offence is a good starting point.
Yeah, I would totally endorse that. And I think it is something about just recognizing it's not intentional. It is all to do with the dementia. And if you can get your head around that and try and use humor at times as well, that can help. Oh, you're using those words again, or such like.
Thank you. Could you talk about whether within the team of Admiral Nurses there are people from Irish backgrounds or with an understanding of Irish culture, and whether or not it is possible for people to indicate a preference for somebody who may share a common language that they may have, or cultural understanding of where they may come from. Are you able to talk about that?
Joan, that's definitely your forte.
Well, I'm actually celebrating 30 years in this country this week, as it so happens. So yes, we do have several Irish nurses on the helpline, and we've got nurses from different cultures as well, which I think is really important. But ultimately, I do think that the core skills, they go across all cultures, and it is about it at the end of the day, it is about understanding the person with dementia, what makes that person tick. That's really key to it all. So even though I'm Irish myself, I have worked with Asian families when I used to work in practice, and Chinese, very different from my culture, and felt able to do so. I think with our dementia education, we look at the person. It's very much about the person and learning about that person. And like Emily had said earlier about the life story work, that is about the person's story, what makes that person unique. And that is at the key of, in my personal opinion, good dementia care is knowledge of the person. I hope that answers the question. Oh.
Thank you very much, Joan and Emily. That's really been very helpful. So you've spoken together about the different things, different types of explaining what dementia is, different types of activity that people could think about introducing with people living with dementia. Just before we finish, it's coming to our time. Could you talk about any support that you're aware of for family carers to be able to have a break from the care work they do? We know that especially during this period of lockdown and COVID and so on, life is a bit different, but generally we know that a lot of family carers are caring 24/7 and finding it difficult to take a break, to step out of that. Do you have any advice in non-COVID times for how people might be able to access some time to step away and come back?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is difficult, like you said, at the minute with the COVID restrictions, but sort of pre-COVID, there's often day centres that people can attend, so it provides respite for people for people who are caring for them. I mean, again, I mentioned earlier about sitting sort of services, there's always that option. Care homes often offer sort of a week respite for people with dementia, so their carers can have a break. Asking friends and family to visit, for an hour, I think that's really beneficial just for you to get out there and or maybe just have a cup of tea sort of on your own is really important. Joan, have you got anything?
Yeah, well, I was going to say there's two sorts of respite, isn't it? There's the 5, the 10, 15 minutes, an hour, maybe once a day. There's time for yourself, and there's also those extended breaks. Actually, I think the Age UK are trying to get their day centres opening up in some parts of the country, so it's definitely worth to look into. And if you've got connections with the Royal British Legion, I do believe they run respite. I think it's called Poppy Respite or some services, and the RAF. So it's, if you've got those sort of connections, it's worth to look into that as well. Yeah.
So many thanks, Emily and Jane, for lots of useful information and some tips and advice that you've shared. And thank you everybody for joining today as well. This is just to remind you that this is a series of webinars that we're running every Wednesday afternoon. Next week, you're welcome to join us for our next webinar, which will be about, well, it's entitled "You Can't Pour from an Empty Cup," and it's about self-care for carers. And we'll be joined next week by a lady called Amanda, who works with the organisation Tide together in Dementia Every Day. So you're very welcome, everybody, to join us for the next session. And I'd also like to remind you that we have resources on our website, including reminiscence materials and activities that you may like to try out with people that you may be volunteering with and caring for living with dementia. So thanks once again, everybody, and have a great rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, goodbye.
Goodbye.